So I do think that there's a lot happening in the dye space and pigmentation space, pigment space. I think that we're still obviously in the early days, but I think that there is a very needed disruption when it comes to how we color our textiles. And trying to figure out a way to reduce the amount of water and energy required is critical with that, and toxic chemicals that go in. I do think that there is a possibility for new materials as well, though, which is what I spoke about before. I think that there are some exciting things happening around using nature in different ways, harnessing it using mycelium, or actually creating new fibers in the lab. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities for influence.
Well, I think if fashion is looking for circularity, the first port of call is looking at how nature builds things, because nature is the master of circularity, right? So everything is used as efficiently as possible, the minimum amount of waste, and that's because it uses biological systems to do it and uses natural materials to do it. So the change that we're seeing in how we make materials and how we functionalize those materials, be it with color or water repellency, sweat absorption, all these kinds of things will shift eventually into biological processes, because ultimately they are more renewable. You are using just sugar to start with, and that's infinitely more powerful than any finite resource that we're using. So with the pressures that the brands and the industries coming from public perception and the impact it's having on the environment, there's a lot of shift in order to find those solutions now and start implementing them. So I definitely see the impact that biotech and SynBio is having on this space. Everything from how we make to how we break down and recycle, it's all moving into the biotech space now.
And I think also it's not about one person, one project, one perspective. It's about the world we want to live in together, and the common ground we are building. And even here we can seem like to be competitors, but I think there's place for hundreds of startups that would be making the same as we do, because there is so much textiles, so much different fibers, so much different things to tackle. But I think that it will not be one person or one material. It will be a kind of, I don't know how you say that, a weaving. But I think that the persons that will be able to take the lead together will be the ones who will not say what people want to hear. Because people want to hear that it's just nature-based and that nature is the best to create things. I'm not sure about that, because nature is the best at what it's doing, but what we want to do when we want to have a clothes that is going through the washing machine, that will resist our sweat and everything, it's both what nature can do and what we want it to go somewhere. So we're not making natural molecules. We're making something else that nature can do in a very, we need to pay attention to where it's going, but it's really a complex game, and I think we need to explain that. Yesterday, there was a big concern about trust, but I think you can't get the trust like this. You need to talk, you need to explain, you need to have also children in the conversation, and some of them were really, they had their opinion. It was really interesting.
Fashion is a wonderful space to start communicating, because you're engaging with people through something that's very personal to them. Right, so people who are going to be looking for these products in the beginning are people who are very focused on sustainability, right? And then you get to talk and converse with the people who really care about the environment and who really worry about GM, right? And that's the best point to start the conversation, because historically have been some of the biggest advocates against it, but they also have the power to be the biggest ones for it. Right, and we're really enjoying being in the space and doing that dialogue, because it's all about exchange of ideas, and we learn so much about how to communicate what we're doing, right? Because that's one of the biggest barriers I found moving away from academia into industry and talking with people who are non-experts at things, is changing the way you communicate and making sure that you're speaking to the person that you're talking to.
It's quite challenging because often when you're working as a designer with a group of scientists, the language used is quite different. I guess I'm in a slightly luckier position having worked in both the scientific and the fashion realm, which makes it a little bit easier. But I think sometimes what I enjoyed most about working in the scientific field was that it was for the pursuit of knowledge, and what we learnt we shared, and we would develop solutions based on that knowledge for everyone to use. And that's the biggest limitation of the fashion industry, is that when people develop something novel that's potentially a game-changing solution, for example, in terms of transforming our sustainability limitations, that's often kept in-house. It's kept private, so that prevents the acceleration of that development. So I think IP is a really big challenge in this area. I think in terms of to go back to your question about who are the people really driving this, I think there are two groups of people actually. I think the groundbreaking, very experimental designers who are trying to kind of grapple with the science around the biomaterials that they're developing are doing really exciting and rule-breaking things. And then at the other end of the spectrum, I think the larger companies that have adequate capital funding and technology are driving the solutions that are potentially going to target, for example, fast fashion, where we have the biggest amount of denim being produced. So, for example, between China is the biggest producer of garments in the world, and Bangladesh is the second. I was speaking to a manufacturer last week, one manufacturer in China who makes 470 million units of clothing a year. Their turnover is 2.5 billion. So if they were to adopt one of your dye processes for their denim, we would already have a paradigm shift in sustainability credentials. So I think that's where, to my mind, where the exciting and game-changing stuff's happening at both ends.
How was it for you?
Well, I think Brooke made a very interesting point. I think that the manufacturers play an incredibly important role in this, whether it's the innovator or the mill or the factory. Because, I mean, I represent a brand. You know, we're very good at communicating. We're very good at designing. But we don't ourselves create fabrics. You know, we don't ourselves own this technology. We're very interested in sharing. I don't think that the issue around, you know, wanting to keep it to ourselves has ever been our problem. And I think the industry is really shifting in that way as well, around not wanting to have things be proprietary. I think in the technology space and the innovation space, it's very interesting because we don't own the tech anyway, so it's not up to us whether or not we share it. But I do see that there is a big shift happening here, but I do think that finding a way and bringing it into the actual supply chain is going to be one of the most critical things, that form of collaboration between, you know, potentially a brand like us helping create the initial introduction. But at a certain point, the collaboration, the partnership needs to move beyond us as an individual company into a manufacturer, into the supply chain. We've done that a fair amount in Italy with some of our partners, is tying them in, bringing them into, you know, some of the best mills in the world in Italy that have, you know, been producing fabric for hundreds and hundreds of years. And we're not a giant company with a huge capital investment opportunity. You know, that's not what we're doing. What we kind of offer to startups is a true collaboration, you know, to say, we will do this for you, but what we will do for you is work with you on development and get your technology into a tangible place where you're going to be working on industrial looms and industrial machines, and it's not going to be a giant factory in China or Bangladesh, because that's not where we're working, but we are going to be talking about mills in Italy. And I think that collaboration has to go beyond, you know, the commercial kind of shiny bit into how we actually start to scale these things and see the transition. But with all of these technologies, we have to do it in a smart way. Like, I see a huge amount of future in this, but, you know, if we start bringing bacteria into dye mills, they're not set up for it. So, you know, if this manufacturer in China switched over to one of your guys' incredible technologies, they would not have a wastewater treatment facility that was set up to manage anything outside of synthetic dyes. So we are talking about big transitions, and they need to happen, and we need to do it, but we do need to do it with our eyes open. And I think, you know, this issue around trust and safety is critical, because I mean, I have a huge amount of faith in this industry when it comes to what it can do for fashion, but we have to also always consider the unintended consequences of these things. When rayon was initially created, it was not created with the understanding of how it would scale, what the impact on forests would be. It was just created as an alternative to silk, you know, in the same way that what Bolt's doing was. And those unintended consequences. I think that's why it's good for people in my jobs to have these conversations, is we're a bit paranoid. And we're always looking for what the problem could be. And I think that trying to have those conversations at the beginning and creating those partnerships with companies that are also thinking through what their unintended consequence could be is critical.
And then when we stay with like scaling and bring it into the supply chain, I guess there are two different approaches. One is really making a technology that can be integrated in the current system, and the other one is actually making a new technology where the industry or the supply chain has to change. And I think Marie and Or, you have two different opinions on that. I would actually love to hear your personal approach. What do you think? In which direction will it go?
But we choose the option where we are changing how the dyes are made. But in the end, what we deliver to our clients and partners is a dye that they can use as they used to use it. Because otherwise, it's not possible for them to have a new infrastructure, and this is another job to have biology and all stuff, and they would not go into it. That's what we think, but there may be other options. So.
No, actually, I think our views aren't that different. It's just that rather than provide a dry pigment powder that then they'll input a machine, we're providing a dye liquor that goes into the same machine. So the idea is always, if you make integration easy, people will try it. If you make it difficult, you're going to spend a lot of time trying to get someone to take a gamble and see if it works. So the whole thing for us was make sure that it's all compatible with the machines they're using, beam dyers, jigs, everything. And now actually going and visiting dye houses across the world and seeing how everything works, it's really encouraging. It doesn't actually take that much to get them there.
So where do you see then at the moment the biggest challenges to bring it really to the fashion industry where it's really about scale as well?
Really, to me, it's time. It takes time so it must be very exciting for you to work with these companies and to produce 10, 100 of pieces, but you would like more, and it's just, the problem is just we need a little time to create something that is a great technology with the same performance at the same price, so with big scales, and it takes so much time for us to make just all the LCA. You can have hundreds of tests for one molecule. It costs a lot. Well, that's another conversation, but it's fascinating also because about proprietary technology or open source, because at first, for the first 4 years, we wanted to make something open source, but it was not just possible. And if we wanted to stand on this position, we would not do what we are doing. And in the end, we thought, okay, our goal is to replace something. It's not to do open source, because no one can pay for what we are paying today when we make a big fermenter. No one could do that. So even if we put our technology in open source, no one could do that. So they already know how to do it, like we did in workshops with the bacteria that they can have, and they can play with it, and they can make little proof of concept. But when you want to take something to the next level and really challenge an industry, you need to make an industry, and this is not possible in the biotech. I think it's difficult. It's possible for hardware, for software. It's nearly impossible not to do it, but it's for what we are doing, it's not just interesting, in fact. And we really had this in ourselves. We really wanted to make that, and then we realized that it's being stupid just to want something that will get nowhere on this. But I really agree with you that there are all these things, and it's very interesting that people have explorations and then really confront to the real constraint of something different. In industry, it's something different.
So I will ask one more question before I also give like a few ones away to the audience. Brooke, you work a lot with young talents. Claire, Stella McCartney is actually supporting the Biodesign Challenge, where it's about preparing the designers to kind of be able to actually face the industry and biotechnology. And Marie, you're actually teaching designers as well. So do you think that we're actually preparing designers and biotechnologists for the industry to be able to make products?
No, not really. We're not preparing designers in any case. In terms of the sciences, the pure sciences, there's no issue there. It's tooling designers with the knowledge and the understanding of biology and chemistry that will help them to come up with novel solutions. That's the sticking point. But I guess that's why there's now an MA Biodesign course at Central St. Martin's, and you're doing a lot of work at the RCA as well across disciplines. So I think there's a recognition, but it's not quite established yet in terms of output. But there's absolutely no lack of ambition. We've just taken on a BA Fashion Textiles graduate from UEL who's been experimenting on the side with seaweed and sodium alginate composites and 3D printing them for fun. And this was whilst her tutors were saying, finish your final collection, you've got a show in 2 weeks. And she wasn't really being given any scope for that. So we've taken her in so that she does have scope. But there's definitely the will and the interest there. There's just not the provision, except for those sort of isolated cases.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I think that within like fashion design education, sustainability has still been slow to come in. So, I mean, we're just now starting to see curriculum for designers that includes the impact of what they're designing. And I think that technology, biotech, innovation will be the next wave, but we are still kind of in the beginning stages of, I think, helping designers think beyond just what they create to what it takes to create it. And so I think that that shift has to happen first before we can expect a designer to be able to interact with biotech. So I think we're in that stage still, but I do think things like the Biodesign Challenge, which is an interesting global competition to design schools, are helping get people to think about how different applications can be used. The one it just finished in New York last week. I wasn't there, but someone on my team was, and we saw 2 projects coming in through fashion. One looking at creating a non-animal fur using plants, but manipulating using enzymes, things like that, and one around PHA, which is a very interesting. There's a lot happening with PHA as a biodegradable material for fashion. So I do think that, and we also work a lot with Central St. Martin's. We've worked with Material Futures, and I think that right now those courses aren't necessarily overlapping in the way they could, but I think the fact that schools like CSM are housing under their roof, biotech courses, Material Futures courses, and is the leading design school in the world, that like even if it's not happening yet, just having everyone in the same building eventually, as these things become more mainstream, as it becomes more interesting, as it becomes more fashion to think about technology, that there will be a natural evolution of things kind of starting to blend. So I do think I agree that we're not there yet, but I think we're taking the steps towards the place where we'll be there.
Yeah.
I'd actually say that the designers are more prepared than the biologists are at this stage.
Why would you say that?
Well, at the end of the day, when a designer's choosing what materials to use, they're looking at sustainability index, and they understand the product that they want to make, and then it's a choice of material, feel, color, etc., that goes into it. And the whole thing is, once there's a bio choice and there's a reason to choose it, the designer will use it. They will find the best concept to apply it and do it, because that's what they're great at. That's where the creativity is applied there, right? With the biologists, we don't really understand how the textile and the fashion world works. I mean, 2.5 years ago, we really didn't quite know how this works. And it was a very interesting journey to look into that and to see that. But I think more discourse, more openness from the industry side on how things work, what the requirements are, right? Just for us, even understand what the textile houses are looking for in color facets exactly is difficult. There's, 4 or 5 different standards for sustainability. Which one do you certify with? They all cost money, and a young startup can't decide. So from the biotech side, we are much more woefully unprepared than the designers. The designers know what they want and how to use it. We just don't know exactly what they want and how to give it to them.
And I just wanted to add that there's also iGEM, where designers can also join a team and see really for real how it happens. Like Biodesign Challenge and iGEM are 2 fantastic opportunities for designers and people in biology and synthetic biology to really get into the subject. So that's fantastic. And yeah.
Thank you so much. We ran over, so I would just encourage to keep all your questions and attack everyone at the coffee break.
Oh.
I want to thank you all for joining me on the panel. Or can I get 5 minutes? I got 5 minutes, so we have time for a few questions. Do we have some microphones as well? Then I would just start with the front here, maybe.
I think they've got one in the back first. I think someone in the back has a mic already.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so in the back there, where there's number 2.
Hello.
Hi.
That was a really great talk, and it's like really interesting to hear about all these amazing technologies that could be used to kind of combat issues with sustainability. But my understanding from what you guys were saying is this is quite a long way from delivery. That's what it seemed to me anyway. And considering so, I think the UN last year published a report saying we have 11 years to drastically change what we're doing to prevent disastrous effects of climate change. Bearing this in mind, do you think that our focus on developing technologies to solve problems is causing us to overlook potentially simpler and more effective solutions to these problems?
I mean, I think that that's kind of what I was trying to speak to earlier, is that no, I don't, actually. I think that, at least not within the fashion industry, I can't speak to the innovators, but I think that we're looking at both things side by side, that some of these things we think will scale much quicker. I think that some of them will take longer, but at the same time, we're not ignoring the impacts that we have now. My experience working in this industry is that even if we're looking at easy wins, they take about 2 to 3 years. And so that's why it's crucial that brands are taking this seriously now. And I think that outside of looking at nature-based solutions and innovation, I mean, I think there does need to be a conversation about consumption and the amount of consumption, the amount of waste that's existing, because realistically, if we had all the technologies scaled today and we did everything we could in the supply chain, the rate in which we are producing clothing and disposing of it is genuinely unsustainable. And I do, again, think that there is a role for government there, that there should be a tax on waste. There should be some kind of accountability for the amount of waste that a business is creating if they're creating products that are not durable, because clothing should be, at least durable for a year. And a lot of products that are on the market now, you wear them a few times and you start to see them fall apart. So I think that I think all of these things do go together, but I don't believe that the industry, at least the fashion industry, we work with pretty much any company you can think of. We've had a conversation with behind closed doors. We treat sustainability as a pre-competitive issue. And I do think that the industry is not being distracted by this. I think they may be being distracted by other things, but I don't believe that technology is necessarily disrupting us from what we need to be doing to address the issues in our supply chains.
I actually think that's a really interesting question, and it's one that comes up quite regularly at sustainability summits related to fashion. And actually the summit that I was at recently in Bangladesh threw this question up. And really there's a lot that can be done just with behavioral change. I'll give you an example, because there's one particular manufacturer that we work with in Bangladesh who makes 300 to 400 samples a day for retailers in the UK prospectively. So these are just designs based on ideas from Instagram or that they've found online, and they launch these samples on the off chance that they may take them through to production. But 90-something% of them never go any further than that one sample. So that kind of behavior, that way of retailers putting pressure on manufacturers to do that day in, day out so that they've got something in the works to keep the product flowing, those behavioral changes would make a huge difference. So partly, yes, I think technology can sometimes distract us a little bit, or actually, to put it more finely pointed, we sometimes rely on technology to solve the problems for us rather than looking at the behavior, which Claire also mentioned is at the consumption end. So there's certainly something in that question for sure.
And I would like to add to what you're saying, because it's very true that we need to change how we produce and how we consume. How we produce can be changed by the technologies we're all developing, but it will not save the world. we really need people in between, designers and others, just to imagine, project how it's going to be used, and then influence the way we develop these technologies. And I mean, for us at Pili, but I'm sure a lot of people are thinking the same. Like, we don't want to work with any brands. We want to work with people who really understand what it's all about. It's a long-term thing, and it's also, we don't want them to market something on the bio thing and natural things, and we want them to really understand what it's all about. So I think it's really important. And something that fashion never really says, even if it's getting more and more sustainable. And what you're doing is totally amazing, and you're one of the only one to do that. It's very rare. But when will a fashion brand said, we will produce less because we need less? This is something else. This is very difficult because it means we will make less money, maybe, but
We take that as the final statement. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.